Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Econ Americas podcast, where we share under the radar investment opportunities across our big continent, North America, Central America, and South America. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on all the major podcast platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, you name it. If this is the first time you're listening to this show, Econ Americas is a research firm that provides financial and economic intelligence. Learn more about us and our services at econamericas.com. And today, I'm joined by Justin Cochrane. He is the founder and CEO of Carbon Streaming, a company that provides investors a way to invest in a low carbon future. Also, Justin has extensive experience in royalty and stream financing. He was formerly president of Cobalt 27 Capital Corp, which raised over 1 billion in equity and debt prior to its sale in 2019. Justin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks. And I'm excited about this conversation today because conservation efforts in Latin America still need lots of support and incentives in the private sector. There's still much tension between, economic development and especially agriculture and protecting the environment. For instance, Paraguay, the country where I'm from, has one of the world's highest deforestation rates due to cattle ranching and monoculture crops. So it's a very important issue for our continent. And carbon markets are touted as a way to provide those much needed incentives for conservation. So, Justin, why don't we start with the basics? And for people who may not have heard of the term, what are carbon credits and carbon offset projects?
Yeah. Thanks very much. So a carbon credit, every carbon credit that's traded around the world represents 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents. So it's a credit then that can be traded internationally between buyers and sellers and project developers. And so what you have is this market that's developed where project developers, so companies that are protecting the forest in this case, right, preventing a forest from being cut down, protecting mangroves, protecting peat swamps, and preventing the deforestation of these tracts of land. By their project activities, they get issued carbon credits. Again, each carbon credit representing 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide, and those credits can then be sold to buyers around the world who are looking to offset their own emissions such that they can claim that they're on their way or that they are carbon neutral by supporting these types of projects around the world. And so we set up Carbon Streaming Corp to be a public company that can invest in these projects and then turn around and find the buyers for these global credits.
So, who are the usual participants of these arrangements? Are they institutional funds? Are they publicly traded companies? And how do they work in practice? How does a fund come to you and ask to buy a carbon stream?
So we on the project side, our partners tend to be conservation groups, environmentalists, and in some cases for-profit entities that are developing these projects around the world. And so because we're a public company, we've got a very public profile. So they're reaching out. We're either reaching out to them and many of our project partners are developers of multiple projects around the world, or they're coming to us through our website or through some of our contacts and consultants and other industry players to carbon streaming because they know we can be investors in their projects and help them develop their projects around the world.
So your company has 2 projects in Latin America, one in Mexico and one in Brazil. Can you tell us more about those and what do they entail for local landowners and the communities that are involved?
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we start with the Marvivo project in Mexico? Marvivo is a mangrove conservation project. It covers 22,000 hectares in Baja California, Mexico, on the Pacific side. And by protecting 22,000 hectares of mangroves, we're also protecting over 130,000 hectares of a marine ecosystem that surrounds the mangroves. And so we invested $6 million in the Marvivo Corporation, which is developing this project with the local community members and the local conservation groups. We hope to have that project online in the next 12 to 18 months. That's a project that will avoid the destruction of about 1 million tons of carbon dioxide on an annual basis. So we'll generate 1 million carbon credits, which we will then look to sell and find the highest marginal buyer. And when we sell, the majority of our proceeds go back to the project developer. So it's a revenue sharing model where we tend to keep 10 to 20% of the revenue, and the other 80 to 90% goes back to the project developer. So that's just a fascinating project. I had the pleasure of visiting it a few months ago, really meeting with local community officials, really, really excited about the potential for that project. And then the ERA project in Brazil is actually an avoided conversion project in the Cerrado biome of Brazil. So think not as big as the Amazon, but the Cerrado biome is a massive area in Brazil that faces some of the highest deforestation rates to the things that you talked about, to particularly agricultural losses for cattle and other farming activities. And again, 2021 was a huge year for deforestation in the Cerrado biome. So our project is bringing local farm owners and landowners together and trying to, in effect, make the land more valuable, untouched, than it is when it's being converted into these alternate uses. And that's what carbon credits is all about. And so that's a small project that's growing, really excited about the team there. But what we need to support these types of projects is a higher carbon price, such that more farmers are signing up to these grouped projects, protecting their land, making we say the trees worth more standing than and alive than dead, and we certainly believe that's where the market's headed.
And what is the usual time frame for these projects? How many years do landowners agree to lock up to conserve their land?
So generally it's a permanent commitment. So generally the industry looks at it as a 90 to 100-year commitment. In terms of the carbon credit project, those tend to be about 30 to 40, in some cases 60-year projects. So you would have you would have carbon credits being generated from this project for the next 30, 40, 60 years, sometimes longer. But you'd be committing to permanently conserve that property. And that's part of selling that carbon credit to another buyer, a global buyer around the world. They want to know that that's a permanent metric ton of carbon dioxide that you've saved.
Sure. And in this sense, what can Latin American countries do to boost these conservation efforts? Because many may have legislation that enable, carbon credit and carbon offset deals, but they are still rare in the region. So, what do you think could be done to boost this industry?
Yeah, so a lot of it's being led by regulations, and as often I say, unfortunately, because you'd rather not have to have regulations driving this type of activity, but that's just the reality of the situation we're in. So the regulatory environment is critical. What you see in the U.S. as an example is the Securities and Exchange Commission talking about making publicly traded companies in the U.S. report their climate-related risks, and so their carbon footprint, in effect, and that alone would drive companies to actively offset their carbon footprint, which we think would be a tremendous outcome for the industry, and we believe that'll happen this year. In Canada, where I am, we have a carbon tax program that's at $50 per ton cost today, going to $170 by the end of this decade. And that market again is forming a price that will certainly support more of these types of projects throughout Canada. And so, we encourage those types of, whether you're in Europe, a cap and trade program, carbon taxes, regulatory incentives for companies to start reporting their carbon footprint, and even pricing incentives, potentially for companies to start. Maybe it's a tax incentive for companies to start offsetting their carbon footprint. But the reality is, we need to take action yesterday. We're already too late, and so. And what we've seen in the last year is a wholesale commitment, it seems, by governments and corporations and individuals to help fight climate change. And we need that to continue to hear if we're going to be successful.
Exactly. And one of our themes here at Econ Americas is the development of capital markets, because there's still much to be done in the region in terms of stock exchange listing. Many publicly traded companies that do business in Latin America go to New York or even Canada to list and raise funds. So having these incentives could also be a way to promote capital markets in the region. And I think it's very promising for companies like yours to start building these projects so they can show other companies these are feasible and these are also lucrative investment.
Absolutely, wholeheartedly agree. And when we look at our investment pipeline at Carbon Streaming, we've got dozens of projects throughout Latin and South America. So there's tons of potential in Latin America to support these types of projects. We're really excited about the region. Obviously, Brazil's a giant country for this, but throughout Latin America, there's many opportunities that we're actively working on today, and excited about what the future has in store for the region.
So for the investors willing to diversify and dip their toes into the carbon credit market, or even in ESG investing in general, what strategies do you recommend? What should they look for in a company in this industry?
Well, first off, there's not a lot of publicly traded companies. We're pretty unique, and believe we were really the first of its kind, and we're investing in these not actively developing these projects, but investing in the developers that are in the people who have a lot of expertise in that area.
Right.
So I would say, but most importantly, of course, paying attention to the quality of the projects that either the company's invested in or that the company is developing. That's critical. And of course, they're not all nature-based projects. We see lots of opportunity in renewable energy and renewable power, in biofuel projects, in cook stove projects throughout Africa. The nature-based projects are a tremendous sectors, part of this sector as well. But lots of different projects, lots of different project developers. There's certainly groups that are better at it than others, and I would pay close attention to that. We at Carbon Streaming spend a lot of time with our own team and consultants, making sure that we're picking the right projects and picking the right project developers to partner with. But it's a very exciting industry. There's going to be lots of growth. There's also going to be a lot of change in the next 5 to 10 years. So I would say just keep an active watch on the industry. And there'll be Carbon Streaming. I think we're going to have a very exciting future here over the next several years. There'll be other companies like ourselves as well, of course. But just encourage investors to get behind what we're trying to do, which is invest and support projects that can truly help fight climate change, but also create sustainable futures for the local communities around these projects. So it's a sort of a win-win, and of course at the same time help maximize shareholder returns and generate positive shareholder returns. So it's a sort of a win-win-win for all.
Definitely. And finally, I ask these questions to all our guests, and because this podcast is about unveiling investment opportunities, right? What is an industry or a trend, maybe a particular region perhaps has to do with crypto. Everything is going to crypto nowadays, that you think is still flying under the radar and could grow exponentially over the next years?
Well, that's a fabulous question. I mean, I think carbon credits. I mean, I'm paid to be bullish, obviously, but I think
Of course.
carbon credits is still very much under the radar. Crypto is no longer under the radar. I spent a lot of time in the decarbonization theme before starting carbon streaming, and thinking about energy metals and the transition from gas powered vehicles to electric vehicles. I still think that's a really exciting area, both in terms of the metals that go to service that industry, but also just the kind of transformation that industry is undergoing, and kind of a fight to dethrone Tesla, if that's possible. But carbon credits, when you look at the industry, although it's becoming better known, it still has a long way to go before before it has the kind of knowledge that we see in other parts of this market, and it needs a lot of industry support, a lot of transparency to come to this market, and we're pretty excited about what the next sort of 5 to 10 years have in store. And when you think about this industry, there's trillions of dollars that need to be invested to try and reduce emissions over the next couple of decades. Like, we're trying to take a world that's generating 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide today to zero, or close to zero, in the next couple of decades. That's going to take trillions of dollars. It's going to take a much higher carbon price, and we're just at the early innings of this industry, we firmly believe.
Definitely. And here at Econ Americas, we'll be keeping a close eye on carbon streaming and all the industry, because Latin America will certainly get a lot of attention in this space. So, Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. And folks, I'll leave all the link in the show notes. We'll have links for Justin's company, where it's traded, and links to articles about carbon credits, carbon offset programs, and the like. Of course, you can always leave your comments, suggestions, and please subscribe. Leave us your questions for next guests, and what topics would you like us to cover. Thank you again for following us and our work, and see you next month.
Thanks again for having me.